The most powerful queen in the galaxy had never formed a bond. Not with love, not with alliances, not with destiny itself. Until one day she looked into the eyes of a human who refused to kneel. In that moment, the throne, the empire, and the future quietly began to change. The palace had ruled itself for so long that it barely noticed its queen anymore. Decisions flowed through crystalline processors, laws adjusted themselves, wars were predicted and quietly avoided, and the throne chamber hummed with a patience that bordered on smugness. At the center of it all sat the queen, motionless not because she was frozen by ceremony, but because nothing around her required haste. She had learned long ago that urgency was a weakness others enjoyed exploiting. She listened as petitions dissolved into statistics, as ambassadors bowed with the careful optimism of people who already knew the answer would be no. Bonds were proposed. Alliances were framed as necessities, as destinies, as unavoidable steps toward galactic stability. She rejected them all with the same calm finality, her long ears lifting slightly whenever someone tried to sound emotional instead of rational. The translators often struggled with her tone. It registered as polite, decisive, and faintly exhausted. A court aide once joked, very quietly and very incorrectly, that the queen had rejected gravity itself. Gravity, at least, had the good sense not to argue. When the human was brought in, no one expected anything except paperwork. Humans were catalogued organisms, known for their stubborn survival instincts and a habit of naming weapons after feelings. The warrior had been intercepted near a collapsed trade corridor, his vessel damaged by spatial interference that the palace systems blamed on outdated human navigation software. The guards escorted him in with professional boredom, already thinking ahead to lunch cycles and the mild disappointment of nutrient paste. The queen did not rise. She did not signal interest. She simply looked. Something in the chamber stuttered. Not audibly, but in the way silence can misstep. The predictive arrays hesitated, as if unsure which future to present first. The human stood where he was placed, shoulders squared, expression unreadable in that peculiarly human way that suggested both confidence and the willingness to improvise badly. "State your designation," the queen said, her voice carried evenly through the air, translated into his language with irritating cheer. He considered this. "Too long, according to protocol." "Depends who's asking," he replied. Several advisors inhaled sharply. One of the drones dimmed, possibly in embarrassment. "I am the one deciding whether you remain intact," the queen said. "That helps," he said. "I'm a warrior, apparently. That's what they wrote on the file." The file did, in fact, say that. It also said many other things, none of which explained why the neural scanners were producing nonsense patterns that looked suspiciously like laughter. A scientist coughed and suggested recalibration. Another muttered that perhaps the human mind operated on jokes instead of logic. The queen felt an unfamiliar pressure behind her eyes. Not anger, not curiosity, something untidy. She disliked untidy things. "You were found near restricted space," she said. "That implies intent." "It implies bad luck," he said. "If I had intent, I'd have brought snacks." Against her will, something in her chest shifted. The queen allowed a pause to exist, then decided it had gone on long enough. "You will be examined," she said, "for strategic assessment." "Ah," he said, the polite version of poked. A few attendants failed to hide their smiles. The queen noticed. She always noticed. Humor was a contagion she normally quarantined quickly. Still, she did not correct them. As he was led away, the palace systems resumed their perfect rhythm, slightly embarrassed by their earlier hesitation. The throne chamber settled. Advisors resumed whispering probabilities. Someone somewhere updated a risk model with a note that simply read, "Anomaly." The queen remained still. She told herself this was nothing. Another organism, another disruption to be measured and discarded. She had ruled without bonds, without attachments, without the inefficiencies of sentiment. It had made her empire strong, elegant, and very difficult to surprise. And yet, long after the chamber emptied, she found herself replaying the moment the human had looked back at her without fear, without reverence, and without trying to sell her a future wrapped in promises. It was deeply inconvenient. "Run the encounter again," she told the palace. The palace obeyed, slightly confused, and somewhere in its vast intelligence a tiny subroutine logged a joke it did not understand, but somehow liked. The human did not react to captivity the way the palace expected him to. Cells adjusted their light to unsettle prisoners. Gravity subtly shifted to remind bodies who was in charge. Time itself ran a fraction slower, enough to fray nerves without triggering alarms. None of it worked. He noticed the gravity change, shrugged, and asked an automated wall if it could make up its mind. When it did not respond, he apologized to it anyway, just in case. The palace recorded this exchange and flagged it as unnecessary politeness. The queen did not visit him. That, too, was deliberate. Distance preserved order. Observation was safer than presence. She watched through layered perception fields that translated his movements into data, his expressions into probability curves, and his silences into questions no one had programmed an answer for. He exercised in the small space, not to escape but to stay occupied. He spoke to himself, occasionally to the surveillance nodes, and once delivered a long critique of alien nutrient paste that concluded with the generous assessment that it built character, mostly the resentful kind. Her advisors gathered in the decision chamber, their voices overlapping in careful disagreement. One argued the human was a risk variable best eliminated. Another suggested studying him longer, citing the scanner anomalies. A third pointed out that the empire was currently stable enough to tolerate a mystery. Someone joked that boredom might finally destroy them if they vaporized every interesting thing that appeared. The queen listened, expression unreadable. She approved extended observation, then surprised everyone, including herself, by adding, "I will speak with him." The room went very quiet. An advisor blinked twice as if checking reality. Directly, one asked. "Yes," she said. Indirectly would be inefficient. They did not argue. They never did, not successfully. Still, the palace itself hesitated, rerouting corridors, adjusting environmental protocols, clearly uncertain how to handle a meeting that was not strictly necessary. The queen walked anyway, her steps measured, her long ears relaxed, her mind cataloging reasons that made sense and ignoring the ones that did not. When she entered the containment chamber, the human was sitting on the floor, assembling something from discarded meal containers and a loose panel he had somehow convinced the wall to part with. He looked up, took her in without standing, and nodded. "Good timing," he said. "I was about to name this thing, but it feels like a joint decision." "What is it?" she asked. "Unclear," he said. "Possibly art, possibly a complaint." She waited. Silence was a language she spoke fluently. He glanced around, then at her again. "So," he said, "you're the queen who doesn't like deals." "I dislike unnecessary ones," she said. "That tracks," he said. "Most unnecessary things cause problems, like this panel." He tapped it. It fell apart. Something like amusement flickered through her thoughts, unwelcome but persistent. "You are unusually calm," she said. "I've met worse rooms," he replied. Some of them were meetings. She allowed herself to sit, not on the floor, but close enough that the power dynamic shifted just enough to be noticeable. The palace systems immediately recalculated 12 scenarios and disliked all of them. They spoke for longer than protocol allowed, about nothing important which somehow became everything. He asked questions without expectation. She answered more than she intended. He remarked that her empire felt very quiet for something so large. She told him quiet was efficient. He said efficient things often forgot to laugh. She replied that laughter was not a governing principle. He said that was probably why rebellions tended to start with jokes. She should have ended it there. Instead, she asked him why he had become a warrior. He thought about it. Really thought. "Because someone had to stand where running didn't work anymore," he said. Then he smiled faintly. Also, the uniform had pockets. The palace flagged that moment as statistically significant. The queen ignored the alert. When she rose to leave, he did not bow. He did not reach for her. He simply watched her go, as if confident the story was not finished. Back in the throne chamber, bonds were proposed again. Alliances, unions, strategic attachments. The queen dismissed them with practiced ease. Yet somewhere between rejecting a treaty and postponing a war, she realized something had shifted. For the first time in many cycles, she was not entirely certain what came next. The empire began to notice the pause. It was not dramatic. No alarms rang. No stars went dark. Decisions still emerged from the palace with their usual precision. But between intent and execution, there appeared a sliver of delay, thin as a breath held a moment too long. Markets adjusted late. Military forecasts asked for confirmation twice. The palace intelligence, which had once prided itself on flawless anticipation, started appending its reports with phrases like asterisk subject to reconsideration. The queen noticed, of course. She noticed everything. What unsettled her was not the pause itself, but the fact that she did not immediately eliminate it. The human remained where he was supposed to remain, which irritated several factions who had expected him to be gone by now, preferably vaporized, neatly archived, and never spoken of again. Instead, he had become a constant background presence in the palace systems, a variable that refused to settle into obedience or threat. He trained. He talked. He asked the palace artificial intelligence if it ever got tired of predicting the same futures. The AI responded that tiredness was not part of its emotional range. He told it that sounded exhausting. Political pressure arrived disguised as concern. Delegations suggested that the Queen's long refusal of bonds was admirable but outdated. Rivals hinted that isolation bred weakness. Allies joked, too loudly, that perhaps the Queen needed a hobby. One ambassador suggested ceremonial companionship, purely symbolic, of course, which earned them a remarkably calm explanation of how symbols could still be lethal. Through it all, the Queen listened and thought, and for the first time in her reign, questioned the structure she had never questioned before. She summoned the human again, not to a chamber or a cell, but to a balcony overlooking the slow spiral of artificial stars that powered the capital. The palace systems protested quietly, citing risk, optics, precedent. She overrode them all. He leaned against the railing, peering into the luminous void. "Nice view," he said. "Very contemplate your choices energy." "Your choices brought you here," she replied. "True," he said, "but staying feels like a group project at this point." She did not smile. She did not need to. "You challenge my empire simply by existing," she said. "I get that a lot," he said, "usually right before someone throws me out an airlock." She turned to face him fully. "I have rejected every bond offered to me, emotional, political, symbolic. They weakened those who accepted them." "And you didn't want to be weakened," he said. "I did not want to be dependent," she corrected. He nodded. "That makes sense. Though," he added, glancing back at the stars, "there's a difference between standing alone and refusing to stand with anyone." The silence that followed was not tense, it was thoughtful. The palace systems did not know what to do with it. "What would you have me do?" she asked. He looked at her then, really looked, without challenge or expectation. "I'd have you choose," he said. "Not because you're forced, not because it's tradition or strategy, just because you can." Outside the palace, events accelerated. A rival coalition made its move, misinterpreting the pause as weakness. Fleets aligned, probabilities spiked. Advisors demanded immediate action. The palace intelligence produced outcomes, all efficient, all costly. The Queen stood at the center of it, listening to futures collide. In every version where she acted alone, the empire survived, colder and more rigid than before. In the versions where she allowed connection, limited, deliberate, chosen, the outcomes were messier, louder, but alive. She made her decision quietly. Orders went out, not as declarations of dominance, but as invitations to stand together. The human was released from containment, formally and publicly, his status reclassified from anomaly to ally. When someone asked what bond had been formed, the queen replied that it was not a bond, but an understanding. The difference confused everyone equally. The rival coalition faltered, unprepared for an empire that responded not with brute inevitability, but with adaptive unity. Conflict dissolved into negotiation. War, predicted with confidence, failed to occur. Later, much later, when the palace returned to its hum, and the pause became something softer, the queen found herself once again on the balcony. The human joined her, carrying 2 cups of something he had convinced the nutrient synthesizer to approximate. "It's supposed to be tea," he said. "It has opinions about that." She accepted it. That alone marked a change she would not have acknowledged aloud. "You altered the course of my empire," she said. "You let it change," he replied. "Big difference." She considered this. "I will still rule alone," she said. "Wouldn't expect anything else," he said. "But you don't have to be alone while doing it." She looked out at the stars, then back at the palace behind her, still efficient, still powerful, but now something more than a perfect machine. For the first time in her reign, the future did not feel like a closed system, and she found she did not reject that feeling at all.